1973. OPEC jacked up oil prices. Mexico was minding its own business, not caring about trading. But then you find that you have this resource that's very valuable. The world wants to pay a high price for it. So I told the Mexican oil is a low-grade oil. It's expensive to refine. The profits on Mexican oil were lower than on Middle Eastern oil, where you just take a gun, shoot a hole in the ground, up from the ground came a bubbling crude oil, that is. Oil is the greatest discovery ever, of all time. After numbers. Well, oil is a discovery, numbers is an invention. But once the price is higher than the cost, there's profits there, why not do it? Mexico, which did not care about trade, found itself drawn into this thing because the profits were there. Oil prices sank. But what happened when Mexico found the oil was that now you have this potential source of income. The world was willing to lend Mexico money because of the potential it had in the ground. Because the oil was always there, and now it had a higher value. So Mexico could say, hey, we have this thing, can we borrow some money? Mexico got introduced to the rest of the world because it had this oil, was trying to sell the oil, but because it was expensive to refine and to produce, etc., Mexico had to figure out how to do this, so you need money for the capital. The potential is there for the profit, but you have to make the investment. So Mexico was borrowing to make the investment and do other things. Because you had this potential source of income, you can borrow money and do a lot of other things that you would love to do, but you don't need to build a house to live in the house. You can borrow the money to build a house in Mexico, so this can help us to build our economy. We don't care about trade, but this thing is so valuable, we can leverage it and get the money we need. Oil prices fell, Mexico is in hock. Oil prices went back up in 1979, Mexico is rich again, Mexico borrowed a lot of money. Let me take that back. So, the Arabs were Bedouins, nomadic people who rode in the sands on their camels at some point in history. But when oil prices quadrupled, the Arabs had no need for that money. They didn't even know what to do with it. What do you do to the desert? Turn it into rich soil? They had no need for the money, nothing to do with it, didn't know what to do with it. So guess what they did with the money? They put it in American banks. Now, in that era, there was no interstate banking. So, a California bank could not have a branch in Michigan. A Michigan bank didn't have a branch in Ohio. Banking was a local thing regulated by state regulations. And those of you on Econ 321 have heard these stories too. For a long time, banking in America was a state operation. The local money will finance the local investments in the local economy and not be shipped off to other places. So the banks that had access to the rest of the world were the banks on the coast. New York, California, but the States internally did not care about that kind of thing. So in Manhattan, the national capital of America, all that foreign oil money came into the American banks on the East Coast. And because of the regulations we had, that money could be on lent to other states. So why did those banks take the money in the first place? It's the multi-million-dollar question. Multi-million-dollar. Because they're banks and they were having international transactions. So what used to happen is that an American bank could have an international branch, but it could have an interstate branch. So a lot of these banks on the coast were multinational banks, because they couldn't invest in Michigan and Ohio, so they invest in Jamaica and with other countries they could make profits off of. It was American, Dutch, and British capital to start off that was drilling the oil in the desert in the Middle East. And after the Arab-Israeli War in the fall of 1973, and the Arabs pushed the foreigners out, oil prices quadrupled because they didn't know what they were doing, and supply went down, and prices, this is great, inelastic demand. They thought this was a good thing. Suffice it to say that in 1979, when oil prices quadrupled, Mexico saw another potential windfall. When the banks received the money from the Middle East, they had to figure out what do you do with this money. They went around to poor countries and said, hey, you want to borrow some money? And the poor countries said, sure. So it's not Mexico, but every other developing country. Let me write a profits equation here that should make sense. Profit is revenue minus cost. Profit for a bank, at the very simplest level, you make money by lending out money at a higher rate than we borrow it from savers. So what else do I need to write under that? RL must be greater than RD. Trivial analogy here. So what happened is that the banks accepted all of those petrodollars, the money that came in from oil. That skyrocketed. In order to keep this thing profitable, if RD is constant, that means that this is increased. That's the cost, this is the revenue. So you're thinking, oh, I should not accept that money because now I have all this money here. But in order for the banks to make profit, they need to increase L or RL. But you can't really increase the loan rate because the world is now flush with all this money. Supply increases, the price should go down. So RL was falling and L needed to be raised. Now we know that loans cannot exceed deposits. And if they receive a lot of money here, in order to prevent the spread between L and D from getting larger, they have to lend the money out. Because banks don't make money by borrowing the money from, or receiving the money, they make money by taking it from you and lending out at a higher interest rate. So the banks were scratching their heads. Should we accept the petrodollars from the Arab countries? Yes. Well, the only way this will work is if we can do what we do, lend it out. But remember what happened when the oil prices quadrupled? Inflation. Prices increased. The world was hurting. So nobody wanted to borrow the money very readily because there's inflation. And for those of you who are purists and love this kind of stuff, the nominal interest rate is equal to the real interest rate plus the inflation that's expected. This is called the Fisher equation. You may or may not have heard about this, but I'm going to talk about it for a minute just to make sure it makes sense to you. The real rate of return is about 2%. So when the inflation that's expected is 5%, 5 plus 2 is 7. The nominal interest rate has to stay above the inflation rate. Otherwise, the institution is lending the money out and getting back less in return. If you lend it out and the inflation erodes the value, then you get it back, it's not worth anything. So a financial institution has to make sure that the interest rate it's charging is higher than the inflation rate. Otherwise, you're going to get back less. So when inflation was skyrocketing because oil prices were skyrocketing, they had to figure out how to raise the interest rate. But they had so much money, they couldn't really raise the interest rate. So the banks were caught in a very bad situation. The solution was too late, not to accept, not to receive the money from the petrodollar windfall that the Arabs had. But like good bankers, somebody wants to deposit money, you take the deposit. You have to figure out, can I on-lend that deposit quickly enough so that I can turn it into a profit? So the banks found that they had a lot of capital sitting around that needed to be on-lent, but nobody wanted to borrow. Some smart person in the banking sector said, you know what, governments don't default. So if we can lend this money to third world countries' governments, since governments pay their loans, that's the safest way to get the money out of our hands. So they went knocking on doors in Latin America and around the world. Hey, talking to governments. You want some money to invest in your country? And these countries said, okay, sure, why not? Because remember, these countries are also hurting. The inflation was eroding the value of things and causing people not to buy their products. So free money, take it. And at good interest rates too, because there was so much of it, the interest rate was low. So the developing countries that received the money in 1974, 75, 76 were thinking, this is a good deal. Remember Haradomar, you need capital to grow your economy. And there's this financial capital that's just, thank you God, it's just available. Thanks to the Arabs who didn't know what to do with it, put it in the New York banks, and New York banks are saying we need to get this in the hands of somebody. Individuals don't want it because of the risk involved, but governments don't default, so give it to governments. And guess what happened? The governments defaulted. And the banks started having problems. Ronald Reagan becomes the president in 1980. The problem was exacerbated because America had its own savings and loan crisis around the same time. For those of you who came in late to this, there were lots of savings and loans in the country. Eventually they were regularizing banks to move on in the system, but savings and loans gave mortgages. And America had a big financial crisis among the savings and loan industry, so they needed to be rescued. And then the New York banks also needed to be rescued because they loaned all this money and they couldn't get it back. So they called up Mr. Reagan and said, you know, we have these problems. We've loaned this money out, and we can't get it back. I need to tell you that part of the story in quick succession. The 1979 oil price hike caused Mexico to borrow more money. But what the banks decided to do by 1979, 1980 is to say, well, we're going to lend you the money, but we're not going to get hurt by that low interest rate again, so we're going to make it a variable interest rate. The world got a new product called a variable interest rate. We lend it to you, the interest rate is not being told to you, it will vary with inflation. Because they don't want to be hurt. They got burned when they loaned the money at low interest rates and the inflation rate eroded the value of the money. So they said, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, we're not going to let that happen again. Variable interest rates became a part of the on lending after 1979. The second round of lending from the second OPEC advance into the New York Bank. Well, when they couldn't get the money back, they went to Reagan and said, we need this money back. Can you help us? So you need to fill in that detail. This is the detail that you studied. Mexico borrowed the money. Oil prices fell. The collateral that Mexico had was not worth anything. Mexico said, guess what? We can't service our debt, so we're going to choose not to service the debt and buy the things we need. This is my version of the story. And I heard this version of the story from Jesus Silva Herzog, who was the then finance minister of Mexico. He was the one who called the bank and said, sorry, can't do this. So think of this. Later in life, for some of you, you have a family. You have to pay the bills or buy food. There's only enough money to make one of those choices. You have the kids there. You're going to pay the bank, pay the mortgage, or you're going to buy the food? You're going to buy the food to keep your family alive. So Mexico is saying there are things we need to purchase. Our income from oil is now plummeted. We can't pay the interest on the loan that we took out, so we're going to default on making the payment. And that created a crisis. The financial crisis of 1982 was in August 1982. Mexico picked up the phone and called and said, we can't pay these loans. And the bank said, well, you have to pay the loans. That's the agreement. It's called good faith. We have a relationship. We're in a contract. And Jesus Silva Herzog said, look, we have a choice to make. Now, the way it's written in the history books is very different. He came to Washington and he negotiated, etc. But what he told our class after he lost his job as finance minister, he said they had to make a choice. So he called the banks and said, you can't pay. We go with the textbook's version of, because the version that I'm telling you could be a lie. Is what he told me when he was teaching me. Mexico couldn't pay its debts. Mexico defaulted. Brazil heard that Mexico was defaulted. Remember, all this money was given to these countries. Brazil heard that Mexico defaulted. Brazil called the bank and said, hey, we heard Mexico defaulted. We're going to do the same thing. Argentina called and said, we heard that Brazil and Mexico defaulted. Financial crisis. Latin American countries are not paying their debts. We need a new operation going forward. So Ronald Reagan was called in. So this crisis is going to bankrupt the financial sector in America. Probably wouldn't bankrupt the financial sector. A few banks are writing down their debt, so to speak. So the financial crisis in 1982, the world says we're not trusting Latin American countries anymore because they steal our resources. Ronald Reagan basically said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to tell Mexico that we're going to write in the books that you paid your debt and we loaned you the money back. So this non-performing debt was made to appear as a performing debt. You give us the money back that you owed us, the interest on the debt, and we loaned it back to you. Double entry bookkeeping. We can't pay, so we're not going to pay. And the banks decided to write in their books, Mexico repaid the money and we gave it back to Mexico. But no money actually moved. But because of double entry bookkeeping, it made the loans look like they were performing and active. And therefore, nobody had to know that Mexico was defaulting.
It's just a refinance.
Sorry?
It's just refinancing.
Refinancing, yes. So there are different versions of the story out there, but that's the version I like to tell because it's exciting. Latin American financial crisis. It redefines the financial world. There's another point in 1973 that I skipped over, and I shouldn't have skipped over this. So let me just throw this in there, and we probably won't get to the debt chapter because next week I'll come back to this. But 1973 is another important year for two reasons. One, because of the OPEC energy crisis. But bigger than all of that is the breakup of Bretton Woods. Bretton Woods is shorthand for the World Financial Arrangement. Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, that's the town in New Hampshire where the world got together in 1944 and planned how to move forward financially. That's when the United Nations created the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. So the breakup of Bretton Woods was the agreement that was made at Bretton Woods included fixed exchange rates. So we will negotiate the exchange rates for the US dollar versus the Canadian dollar versus the British pound based on the price of an ounce of gold. So every country pegged its currency to the price of 1 ounce of gold. And they're all then fixed. No? It's kind of like everyone puts their hand on this table. Okay? This table is not moving, no hands are moving. It's a fixed exchange rate. And then that broke up in 1973. The story behind the breakup is not a story for this class because we're focused on developing countries. But a quick, broad stroke out of that is that, and you might have heard other instructors tell you much more interesting stories than what I'm going to tell you. In the 1960s, the U.S. was fighting a war that we couldn't win in Vietnam. And at some level, we had to finance this war. And inflation was starting to creep in for other reasons into the economy. So there was this undercurrent of inflation in the U.S. There was this high expenditure by the federal government financing this war that we couldn't win. I would say the one war that America has lost, if you can call it a loss, frustrates America to know that we could not beat the Viet Cong in the bushes of Vietnam. And so this money was being thrown away, fighting a cause that we thought was good, and then there was all the opposition to the Vietnam War here in America. Why are we fighting this war in a country we don't care about, and all that kind of political rhetoric. Money's being lost here. There's this inflation. Because of the fixed exchange rate, the U.S. is increasing its money supply. Because of the fixed exchange rate, this is called purchasing power parity. It's a good segue into the rest of the course. It says that the price of a product in the U.S. is related to the price of that product in England by the exchange rate. This is an easy arrangement to understand. The price of a Mini Cooper product from Britain is the price of the Mini Cooper in sterling times the exchange rate. Right? You translate it into US dollars, you say what's the British price, what's the exchange rate, multiply those two numbers, and that's what you get the price. When you do that for every product that's being traded, you get this relationship called purchasing power parity. That a product should not sell at two different prices internationally when it's traded. Like water finding its own level, it trades at a single price. You just have to convert it to a different currency, but it's the same price. If you took your money, your US dollars, went to the bank in America, got pounds, when you got to Britain, you should be able to buy that for the same price that a Brit pays for the car, and you have the same amount of money. Purchasing power parity. The problem, though, was that the real money supply in the U.S. was America was increasing its supply of money. The government was trying to finance this war and do other things. The supply of money was increasing. What the supply of money increasing was doing was increasing the price level. So at some level, you can blame money for creating inflation in America. But if the price level rose in America and the exchange rate is fixed, if that equal sign is to remain, then prices in Britain are going to rise. And this applies across the global economy. U.S. price levels are related to British price levels by this exchange rate. The exchange rate is fixed. If the left-hand side is increasing, an equal sign is to be preserved. The right-hand side needs to increase. But if E is fixed by an agreement called the Bretton Woods Agreement, then P star is going to increase. If you're willing to accept that, I can make my point. America was doing things that were in America's interest. America was sneezing, and Britain was catching pneumonia. And Britain said, stop sneezing on me. And Germany and France and other countries were saying, stop sneezing on us. The fixed exchange rate was causing American inflation to feed into other countries. While minding their own business, their prices were rising. Nothing in their domestic economy was causing the prices to rise. because of the peg between international currencies. America's inflation was being exported to other countries. So those countries said to America, you need to stop inflating your money supply and causing prices to rise in your country, which caused prices to rise in our country, because we don't really care what's happening in your country. So they figured if America is not going to do that, then they broke the peg. That's what we mean by the end of Bretton Woods. The countries decided we don't want this fixed exchange rate anymore, because if we want our prices to remain constant, if our prices are to remain constant in our economy, and America's prices are rising, then E needs to go up, so that the equal sign is preserved. If the left-hand side is going up on this side of the Atlantic Ocean, we don't want our prices to rise, then E needs to go up. So what I need to do is to tell you what an increase in E means. If you just think of this as any generic product, and that's the price of that generic product, then the law of demand says, as the price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. Negative slope. There is this lie about the positive slope supply curve. And we can rationalize why economists draw a positive slope supply curve, but let us pretend that is true. Supply slopes up, demand slopes down. The equilibrium price, where demand is equal to supply, is right here. Call that E star. E is the price of foreign currency. Now there's a little bit of a snafu here. If I define the exchange rate as the price of foreign currency, and all countries don't do that, then it's like saying the price of my Nike shoe, the price of that thing, the price of that foreign currency. If the price goes up, I should want less of it. If the price goes down, I should want more of it. The law of demand. So E is defined as the price of the foreign currency. I'm making a point about this because in Britain, they don't define the exchange rate as the price of foreign currency. They define it as the foreign currency price of sterling. How crazy is that? So Britain is defining the exchange rate using the same number that America is defining the exchange rate. That's two different currencies. So the Brits do it backwards. If you define it as the price of a foreign currency, like the price of this egg, or the price of my shoe, or the price of this pen, you're golden. You will never mess up. If you go to Britain, stay on their right side, left side. Don't go to Britain. You'll create confusion in your mind. So this exchange rate is allegedly pegged. So let me draw one more arrangement here. Demand, supply. And I'm going to have the exchange rate pegged at a certain level. I'm going to call it E bar. Suppose the exchange rate is pegged. At this nice set of circumstances, demand is equal to supply. But what happens if the demand for foreign currency goes up and the price is fixed? If the demand goes up, then what we have is an excess demand. In neoclassical economics, we say that if the demand goes up, the price should be allowed to rise. With a fixed exchange rate, the market doesn't solve the allocation problem. So if the demand for foreign currency rises, we are left with an excess demand. If the demand falls, we have surplus. The price, as we understand it in America, needs to fluctuate to go to equilibrium. But up until 1973, the price of foreign currencies were pegged. So you'll always have these disequilibrium situations. And in order to bring it back to equilibrium, the countries had to get together and negotiate on changing the exchange rate. So the market did not raise the price of foreign currency. The governments got together and said, okay, it looks as though the exchange rate should be here, so can we agree to put it there? It took a sit-down conversation. And if a country said, no, you don't want the exchange rate raised, we had this problem. So you understand now how when the U.S. sneezed, Britain caught pneumonia, because the exchange rate was fixed, and if America did something that caused an excess demand, it messed up the world. The price should rise, but it didn't rise. So you have shortages that are artificial, that should not be allowed. It's being allowed. So inevitably, the exchange rate peg was going to have to give way. And it's amazing that we had it fixed for so long, but there are people who still believe it should be fixed. There are people out there who say, no, we need to go back on the gold standard, and every country needs to peg its currency to gold. And, the point is to say that in 1973, the peg broke. Nixon was having a little bit of difficulty between 71 and 73 because of the American situation. There were wage and price controls and all kinds of strange things. So this is a price control. But America had its own problem. Fast forward to the exchange peg broke, and now the world is trying to figure out how do we move forward. It created a lot of problems. OPEC has increased the price of oil, inflation is rampant, exchange rates are now floating. You move from a world where things were relatively certain to a world where there's lots of uncertainty. And these developing countries have this money, and the banks are afraid now to lend. It was just a royal mess. Well, not really. It was a mess, a big mess. So the banks are uncertain about how to move forward. When OPEC gets its windfall again in 79, the banks are saying we don't want to get burned again. Variable interest rates. Price goes down. Maybe the bank should never have loaned the money to Mexico. But they loaned it to Mexico because Mexico had oil. And when you have oil, all does will spoil. So they thought. So they figured it was a good investment. Turns out to be a bad investment. And when Mexico said we can't pay, and Mexico defaulted, and Argentina defaulted, and Brazil defaulted, world financial crisis. You have to know the world financial crisis. How do we fix this problem? The 1980s is called a lost decade for Latin America. Latin America made no gains. It lost the progress it made. So now we have this new international regime of flexible exchange rates, creating lots of problems because people are uncertain. Flexible interest rates, flexible exchange rates, 73, watershed year. 79, crisis, 82, crisis. 1994, Mexico has its second crisis, the tequila crisis. Once the exchange rate is allowed to change, now you ask the question, how do you respond to an international crisis? The exchange rate is at E star. There's a crisis in Mexico. The supply of US dollars that's available in Mexico is going to contract substantially. So the questions for you is, what's causing the amount of US dollars available to Mexicans to suddenly shrink? So there's many ways to play this. You have to say on the demand side, what's causing the demand to move? On the supply side, what's causing the supply side to move? There are many answers to the question. So you say, investors, go ahead. Generic economics.
It means less investors are willing to supply their funds into the Mexico.
So somebody's pulling their funds out of Mexico.
Yeah.
And then the supply that's available to the rest of the Mexicans is smaller, then the equilibrium price needs to rise. And a rise in price of foreign currency, a rise in price of anything makes you nervous, right? It's called a devaluation of the local currency. So the peso is devalued. Supply shrinks, the peso is devalued. There are other explanations for why the supply is shrinking. The more salient one, from the Mexican citizens' perspective, is that the Mexican citizens are hoarding the currency. So if you have access to US dollars, you're putting them in your mattress. You're not trading anymore saying, I need the US dollars to buy US goods. You're saying, let me get as many US dollars as possible and hide them. Because if the price of the US dollar is going to rise, can I say buy low, sell high? Grab it while you can. When the price rises, sell it, you make a profit. Everybody's hoarding US dollars. So where do you hoard them? Do you put them in your mattress? If you have access to the US banks, you get that money into the US bank. Because if you hoard it in your mattress, you earn zero interest. But if you get an American bank, you earn an interest on it. So people are trying to get US dollars and ship them out to Mexico. Obviously, companies that are export-oriented will earn US dollars in America. And they're saying, can we just park the US dollars there as long as we can? Don't send them back to Mexico. Wait for the devaluation to occur, for the price of the dollar to go up, and then bring it home. So everybody's speculating now. So we move from a world of trading because we need goods and services to a world of hoarding and speculating. Which only exacerbates the problem because every time somebody withdraws more, the price goes higher. So that's called hyperinflation. Remember the relationship, purchasing power parity? If E is rising, then P is rising. If Mexico has no control over American prices of goods, but the Mexican peso is losing value, the price of the US dollar is rising, then prices in Mexico are going to rise. So Mexico has its own hyperinflation. In every country that's caught in a situation like this, where the supply of foreign currency is shrinking for one reason or the other, either because locals are putting it in the mattress or shipping it out through some tunnel somewhere, the supply that's available to do business is getting smaller and smaller because people are speculating, then the price of that currency is going to go higher and higher, and prices of goods are going to go higher and higher. Not because of any international activity, but because of domestic hoarding of the currency. So that is called, last comment, capital flight. Let me summarize that. The Mexican economy hurt in 1982 and 1994 because Mexicans bet against their own country. If somebody tells you this stock is going to drop like a rock, do you hold on to it, or do you say, let me get out before it goes lower? Every Mexican who had access to US dollars said, let me hold on to my US dollars. Let me not hold any pesos because they're not worth anything. So the drama of where we're going is that in Latin America, you could get paid in the morning. When you go to the supermarket, you could only buy half of what it could have bought in the morning. Many grocery stores in Latin American countries refuse to put the price on the product on the shelf. When you got to the cash register, they'll tell you the price because the price was rising so fast because of the inflation. So people would carry a wheelbarrow of pesos or reals to the grocery store, to the bank. And they had so many zeros on the currency because the currency was losing value so fast. Latin America had a real crisis in the 1980s. Devaluation crisis. You had to keep reissuing new currency, new pesos, new reals, etc., crossing off the zeros. Financial crisis. So where are we now? We are looking at a situation where, because of capital flight, locals are moving their money out. If there are any foreign investors, they're also pulling the money out too. So in 1994, when Mexico had its political crisis with the assassination of the PRI, the pre-candidate, Americans who were investing in Mexico said, oh, this is unstable. Let's pull our money out. And once the supply is contracting, the currency is losing value. And everybody who has the local currency is saying, I don't want to touch that, and let me get the foreign currency. And that reduces the quantity of foreign currency available for transactions. And you have this devaluation, continuous devaluation. How would you stop it?